Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Infinite Expansion YouTube channel, brought to you in part by The Last American Vagabond. I'm your host, Tim, and I'm here with fellow Last American Vagabonder, Anthony.
Greetings, guys. Pleasure to be back. We had a pretty awesome conversation last time, so I'm excited to follow it up.
Yes, definitely. And so today we wanted to take the time to expand a little bit more on the occult. If you didn't get the chance to check it out yet, please look at the old video we did about the occult, kind of explaining what it is a little bit and kind of where it came from. And so if you're not really well versed in the occult, that might be a good place to start. I will link that up in the show notes. But today we wanted to go a little bit farther and a little bit more specialized, and we wanted to talk about divination. And by divination, basically what we mean, and Anthony will go a little further into this, it just means self-actualization, becoming one with the universe. Self-actualization to me would be one of the best terms. Anthony can go into this farther, but they're basically, and we wanted to tie this to the occult philosophy and using four specific arts in the occult. I always call it more sciences that help people, become divine. So I wanted to start this off and throw this to you, Anthony. What exactly do we mean by divination, and what are the four fields that really discuss this divination aspect?
Well, when you talk about divination and like self-actualization and becoming divine, some people, like traditional Christians and probably Islam, although I'm not as versed in that because Christianity is all around me, they would inherently be inclined to take that as a kind of Luciferian concept, and not in the sense of Satan, but in the sense of the Aleister Crowley Luciferian. They would be correct because in Thelema, the do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, love is the law, and so you self-actualize yourself which would be the microcosm, by understanding your synthesis and your placement in the macrocosm, which is your exterior environment. And so you can also break that down by using the terms, the microcosm being the subjective reality and the macrocosm being the objective reality. And so divination would essentially be, and of course, people have entire careers studying these fields. So this is going to be a general yet accurate breakdown, but I, of course, urge anybody actually interested in this to do their own research. This is merely to whet your appetite. But so divination would be the categorization, understanding, philosophy, whichever word you choose, of understanding the microcosm macrocosm dichotomy, which would be the subjective and the objective.
So how to merge the subjective with the objective. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, because in occult philosophy, what you could consider the dividing line between white and black magic would be using these divinatory sciences for either altruistic purposes or for selfish ends. So if you're subverting something's will, and this goes back to what we talked about last time, and that would be using divination for black magic, and then the flip side would be light magic.
When you started out the conversation, you talked about the Luciferian doctrine. By this, do you mean becoming a god? And so in the Luciferian, becoming a god on earth, is that what you mean by the Luciferian? And then this, obviously this can be spun in a bad way by being a god whereas you are the ruler, or being a god whereas you have the all possibility within you, and obviously you use this for good. But when you talked about the Luciferian doctrine before, is this what you kind of mean by that?
Yes. Again, to preface for anybody who doesn't understand, the Luciferian, the actual Luciferian sense, which is a archetype that predates Catholicism and Christianity, is separate from the Lucifer slash Satan of Christianity and Catholicism, because they actually borrowed a pre-existing archetype to illustrate their idea of Satan, which was, the polarization of the God type figure. So in, Crowleyism, which is kind of a blanket statement, a blanket term, like Luciferianism, and why, people say that he wrote the Satanic Bible is is a very loose equation. It's more Luciferian, and it deals with being a God on earth in a nuanced sense, being God as in self-actualizing, tying it all together, the divine potential within you. So, and other people would call that enlightenment. Some Christians would call that Christhood. It's all getting at the same thing, but people use different labels, and then some of those labels piss people off sometimes, and then it
Right. I could see the Luciferian word obviously pisses some people off, but it's important to know that that term, is not just Satan.
Right. Remember that
I don't particularly use that term, but I've learned to come to know what that term, where its roots came from.
Right. Yeah. For anybody listening, remember that Lucifer is, I think it's Latin for a light bringer, and that is the archetype of the Luciferian. It stems from Prometheus and before that. So that's those are the roots of what people who call themselves Luciferians are dealing with. And so I think it's, kind of a little counterproductive to call yourself a Luciferian. No disrespect to anybody who does so. It's different in your private life, but to go out and say that, you're kind of just like throwing a trigger word in people's faces, and often that people throw up blinders because of that. So I certainly don't consider myself that, but yeah, when dealing with occult philosophy, it's really important. And so when you consider divination, a lot of people in that sense call it Luciferian, and they would be correct, but not in the satanic so going into divination a little more, as you said, that it's four arcane sciences, you could put it, and that is Kabbalah, tarot, numerology, and astrology. And these are symbolic sciences because it's important, again, to the most crucial thing in understanding these is understanding the microcosm macrocosm dichotomy. So again, these are nuanced terms, so you can go into a lot deeper analysis.
Basically,
yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, because when I hear microcosm, macrocosm, at first I was very confused. And basically, it's just the interplay between subjective reality and objective reality.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. So these four arcane, divination sciences are dealing with the the macrocosm through the microcosm. So for instance, when I talk about astrology, that's probably the biggest trigger. Some people, they could understand how tarot works. They see how symbols would enact, trigger things in the mind. Some people, people are inclined to believe or understand how numerology works, especially with like metadata and computer science today. That opens the door up a little bit more. And the tree of life is just really interesting because, as you put it before we started recording, it's like an empirical analysis of things. But so astrology, people are inclined to they have a surface level idea of it, and that's probably maybe the most misunderstood, because astrology itself is a symbolic science. Those daily horoscopes about how, like, the daily formation, or like, charting the stars can tell you like what's going to happen tomorrow. That doesn't make any sense. You have to do your own research. So it really doesn't have anything to do with celestial bodies affecting your life on a daily basis per se. Like I said, it's symbolic, as all the others are.
Let's clarify a little bit here. Let's clarify what we mean by symbolic sciences, and then let's maybe go through them one by one.
Right.
So what I come to understand symbolic sciences, it's like, for example, when someone talks to me, it's not the word that is telling me something. It's the word that brings about an image within my mind, which you could call symbol. And the sciences are more about the images that are created within, you say, the microcosm, within our own subjective perception, and then learning from these symbols. Would you say that's somewhat what it's about? Maybe you can go a little bit more into it, but what do you mean exactly by symbolic sciences?
It's definitely it's a multifaceted statement because you could firstly go into all the stuff we've touched on so far, like the occult aspect and the occult philosophy, and the religious connotations and stuff. But you can also go into neurology and how like the prefrontal cortex helps with um, language formation and communication, because all our communication is done through symbolism. So it's very easy, as well as um, worth it, I guess, to dive into the neurological aspect. Like, I don't necessarily advocate Noam Chomsky, but just like off the top of my head, he's just he's done so much for linguistics before he started spitting out half truths about politics. So stuff like that. Looking into linguistics and the anthropology of how words help define society. That's what.
Really, just words are just defining symbols more than anything, because it's really
Yeah,
the
symbols help
symbols
define
is
society. I should further say.
what really
Go ahead.
gives is really what we feel. Like, I don't know, it's like when when you bring up a word, I might get a symbolic feeling. Someone else might get a different symbolic feeling. So it's really it's not necessarily the word; it's the symbolic feeling beyond the word.
Right. And the other crucial understanding, or like the piece that needs to be understood in order to get how these symbols can collectively affect everyone on an archetypal level, is excuse me, um, the father of kind of the archetypal phraseology, which is Carl Jung, psychoanalyst. And he was, although there are other sources who touch on collective consciousness philosophies, like Helena Blavatsky was a good one as well. um, Jung was good because he went at it from an empirical scientific approach, whereas Blavatsky and others consider themselves like magicians, among other things. And but Carl Jung still was inspired by esoteric traditions. He's quoted numerous times. He wrote like whole pieces on the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, etc. So when dealing with basically, he's just a good source for trying to more deeply understand the collective consciousness. And how the collective consciousness works is it's like a holographic effect with a microcosm, because each individual, it's a feedback loop. You can't separate one from the other. Each individual helps create the cohesive society as a whole. And when the society as a whole is created, that in a sense becomes a separation, the macrocosm, the embodiment of a whole, which is separate but still synthesizes with the microcosm. It's very heady material.
Would you
But
say? What do you think about this explanation for it? So everything I do has an effect. My energetic, uh, anything I do energetically is then transferred into the environment, and so then we're studying the environment to then see ourselves. Would you say that?
right. Yeah, it's using exterior cues and environmental symbols, to further explore yourself and your intuition. Because with all these things, like numerology is there are specific forms of numerology that do different things, like gematria, for instance. There's Western and Eastern astrology. Like the Chinese zodiac has different characters. So they are symbolic sciences because they the symbols are more subjective, but since they've been promulgated by the esoteric traditions for so long, they've survived, and so they are still what's used. But the symbols themselves were originally more subjective, and they became, since they were promulgated so much, they became an intrinsic part of human society. So it's a very, it has very, very deep roots in sociology as well, not just psychology. See, it's, you could also, there's another dichotomy to kind of toss the ball back to you. Microcosm could be considered like the psychology, macrocosm could be considered the sociology, and how those are interconnected.
So basically, there is not necessarily one set, like there's not like an objective truth of symbols, but there are symbols that have been promulgated for a long time that have been kind of planted deep within our psyche, and we can, but by studying these symbols, we can learn about ourselves. I wanted to ask one other, one other clarification, if you could.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone, because I didn't know what these were at first, to be honest. I didn't really study them in school. What do you mean by archetypes?
It's like they go hand in hand with metaphysics, because I like to consider them the metadata of the thought process. For instance, like, you know, if you see a picture of or like a painting or something of a seductive woman, doing whatever with like an umbrella, posing on the beach, you're not going to get something very masculine out of that, likely, in a general sense. You're not going to perceive something very masculine out of that. There are, because of how humans are developed and how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the other people in our society, there are recurring themes of how people process information. You wouldn't see a desk or a wooden chair and be like, oh yeah, I'm hungry, even if you were starving. And so nor would like a picture of a wooden chair ever really make you feel hungry, even if you were like really, really hungry. So the archetypes, from a sociological, human, occult, philosophical standpoint, whatever type of word you want to use, are the recurring themes of how humans process information, specifically about themselves and culture.
Would you say they're kind of somewhat characters we all play? Like,
yes.
For example, this is kind of how I've understood them, but you've probably looked into more than me. But like we've all been like the person who's up against the ropes and is needing to fight to get out of it or something. That could be like a character, an archetype that we play, or the mother of the child is a character, is a that we play in a way. Would you say that's somewhat correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Just like the divination sciences in general, it's multi-purpose, so you can use it to describe recurring themes throughout someone's life, the general character that somebody's held throughout their time. You could also, consider like the zodiac that you were born under, an archetypal representation. And then you can also consider the archetypes thought representations as well. Or you can use it to decode dreams, or so literature, like, for that matter.
Like it could be also like thought of as like thought patterns, similar to how a character is. It's like, I'm playing this character, these are the thought patterns similar of the character. And so basically, I guess with the divination would be looking at the macrocosm to understand these inner archetypes.
Right. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which format of symbolism you settle on. There are different tarot decks. For instance, you could choose the classical Rider-Waite deck, or I have a set of my own.
Let's get into tarot for a second.
Okay.
Maybe explain a little bit, because I'm subject to this too. Before I looked into tarot, I thought it was somewhat of a voodoo science. Not any real science behind it. It's just like a kind of a kooky, gypsy game that, maybe there was, like it was so broad that it didn't like anyone could connect to any of these symbols, where it was not really an actual kind of science. But maybe explain why that maybe isn't necessarily correct, and maybe explain a little bit what tarot is.
Yeah, well, it's understandable why a lot of people are confused about it, because it was the original inspiration for all forms of like playing cards, just the original like playing card deck in general. So it kind of has a connotation of like entertainment. And I guess you could consider it certainly entertaining, but it's not just entertainment. And I didn't really get into it either, because I was like, wow, playing cards that can tell you about yourself, like ever hearing about it in the past. I'll get a drink of water. I never put much merit into it, but studying or looking into the other forms like numerology and the tree of life, namely, you start to realize that you need to get a full picture and you need to study all of them. And so eventually I looked into tarot and started comprehending it a bit more. And it's a 70-ish, depending on the deck of cards, deck. And it has some are more popular than others, but it's like the Rider-Waite deck is the one that is most frequently cited and talked about. That's the most traditional, and it's one of the oldest surviving decks. And it's like what we talked about. We laid some good foundational work with this podcast so far, by explaining the microcosm and the macrocosm, because that is just so crucial. Because that's basically what tarot is. With each deck, or with each card in the deck, it has an archetypal symbol, which also has a correspondence to the zodiac houses, and is classified or categorized with numerology as well. So, see, they all interlace with each other, and for each one, each divinatory science specializes in one thing, but all the others are used to help contextualize that one science, which is why it's important to look into all of them. And so that's basically what tarot is, and it's nothing more hokey than that, and it's really not even very hard to comprehend once you've looked into the micro macrocosm dichotomy, because it's helping you in the way that we just explained with the collective consciousness, dip into the metadata of those thought formations, the archetypes. And when you ask questions, you ask a question, and you're using it as a conduit. The cards are the same thing as eating a mushroom. You eat a mushroom and you're projecting yourself into a new space for consciousness. You sit down in front of a deck of cards with this archetypal symbolism and ask yourself a question, and you start engaging the cards in the sequence, and you can unfold them in different sequences. You could do it different ways, and you start engaging and interacting with a new space of consciousness, and that's how you interact with yourself. There's nothing intangible about it at all. It's merely just probing your own brain. And then the way you get into, as a final comment, the way you get into tarot is often associated with fortune telling and like clairvoyance and precognition. I don't. It's not. It's not most effectively used for those reasons. Although I will say that you can use them for those, but it's by understanding the self. You're looking at the metadata of the brain, and then peering into the possible variables. So I wouldn't say that through any of these sciences could you hone it 100% and be like, yep, that's what's going to happen. But you could get an idea based on analyzing yourself and your habits and your thoughts. You see what I'm saying?
So basically, the tarot deck is a set of all types of archetypes, archetypal images, and by looking at these images, we can kind of learn about ourselves. Like when you look at them, do you like pick one, and then like, so for example, say you went to a fortune teller. From what I've come to understand, and I've never done it, and I'm not an expert on it. I didn't research too much into how it's how the actual tarot deck is read. But
Uh-huh.
so you look at a card, or maybe you pick a card, and this kind of tells you something about your subconscious that you're wanting to get out, and then the person who's maybe reading the cards, like the fortune teller, I guess you could say, they're just read, okay, they pick this archetype, I understand what this card means, and its symbolism, and now I can peer into this, and I can read kind of do a reading off of this card based on their subconscious pick of this card.
Right, exactly. In tarot, the deck of cards is actually considered the oracle. The person reading it doesn't have any sort of supernatural power or anything. The only thing they can really be accredited to knowing is this, the systems of the cards and having hopefully a deep knowledge of symbolism. So you pose a question, and I mean, like I said, there are different ways to do it. You can lay out the cards in different formats for different types of questions and things like that. Like there's a format called the Tree of Life. There's a format called the Celtic Cross, and also there's a Zodiac House as well. And you can also just do a single card. You can shuffle a deck, ask a question, and then gauge it off of that one card that you get out. Or you could just do it free form. It's all probing the mind, like I said.
Okay, and so let's go on to how does numerology then play into all this?
Numerology is um interesting because it, like I said before, it helps, all of these help classify each other and contextualize the other sciences. So numbers inherently are kind of a classification method, and so numerology was a way to embody symbolic significance in numbers and correspond that with other things like um, color and
So it's like putting symbols,
archetypes.
putting symbols to numbers in a way.
Right. That's certainly part of it. And then there's the more mathematical aspect of numerology, where um, you're breaking it down into a mathematic grid. And see, here's the subjective part again, because as I was explaining to you a little bit before we were recording, you can use numerology for different languages with and those corresponding number sequences, number alphabets, or however you want to put that. So the reason gematria is the one that is often tossed around today is because we have so much of our new English founded in ancient Hebrew and the amalgamation of other ancient languages that came from the exact cultures that were using gematria in ancient societies. And so gematria is generally oftentimes what people are actually talking about when they talk about numerology, is like dealing with the Western English language and stuff like that.
Now, parts
Um,
of numerology though also deal with understanding I call it kind of natural law, the natural patterns that form in the objective reality, such as the pi ratio, the golden ratio, these natural patterns that we see forming. Also, like you could talk about the Platonic solids, you could talk about maybe some other things that numerology plays a part in kind of measuring these into actual mathematical numbers.
Most definitely. Yeah, I don't even really need to say more on the matter. You hit the nail on the head. You could also, um, historically speaking, the esoteric studiers would equate numerology and mathematics, because numerology was originally considered part of mathematics. So they considered music as a part of mathematics as well, and like sacred geometry and these types of things, because music was considered the vibratory resonance of mathematics, of numbers.
Right.
um so yeah, there's you could also take it to the sociological level, like we discussed a little bit before, and see how humans are more inclined to do things based on weather patterns, like why you you know statistically quantifying things, as opposed to chalking them all up to chance. You could consider that numerology as well.
Right. And also,
It's
I've
the
understood
deeper.
that
Yeah, go ahead.
numerology is also how they mapped, you know, the seasons, or mapped also mapped how long it takes to get around the Earth, mapped the tilt of the Earth, and that goes, I guess, directly then into astrology with using numerology and also using astrology to view the stars as a way of mapping the Earth's path, rotation, several other things.
Right. Again, I will say going into this that most New Age like peddlers of astrology are saying that it deals with big planets and celestial objects affecting you on an energetic level, on a daily level, and that's very far fetched and just not. It's not accurate. It's not really scientifically plausible. And furthermore, the most important point is it's not really even what the ancients were stabbing at. And in fact, the best way to understand astrology is to look into the empiricism behind it, which is firstly the precession of the equinoxes, because that's how we originally get the zodiac sidereal, because this is like the 26,000 year cycle of the Earth's axial tilt. And so what they did, and again, this is why you can get different forms of numerology or astrology. Uh, um, just want to make sure my laptop is plugged in here so it doesn't die on us. Okay, there we go. Anyway, so because the symbols are subjective more so, and so the zodiac is the the Western, the sidereal astrotheology. That would be considered the Western aspect, and that was the worship of the stars, basically, in an allegorical sense. Getting constellations and pictorial representations and using the numerology that they use to depict or further understand their Earth's rotation and weather patterns and etc. like that. um they started incorporating that into their symbolic science, like what we
Right.
talked
And
about.
also with using it through their stories and pictures and drawings, kind of the symbols
Right.
that were mapped out through, you know over the years, mapping out the way the Earth moved, the way it tilted, and then using these symbols to create kind of stories in a way.
Yeah, so originally, astrology, I guess you could best put it, was astronomy, the original astronomy. And then it was um like it as not necessarily an offshoot, but just like supplementary to that, what you could consider astrotheology became a part of astrology, which is the symbolic part of it, which is taking, just because you can look up in the sky and see the constellation of um, whatever be the case, doesn't mean that that's actually there. But the fact that those stars are there and people have been pointing out that constellation for so long, makes it an inherent cultural archetype. And so that's the use of astrology in that sense. But you still do get an energetic pull. It's not just symbolic, and that's why the precession equinoxes and stuff like that. Because I'm no scholar on the subject, but we all know that our individual consciousness always has a continuous interactive interplay with the Earth's electromagnetic field, because they're the same thing. They're Hertz waves. And so the Earth's axial tilt, which is what they were charting with the astrotheology and the zodiac sidereal, they were charting the axial tilt and the change in weather patterns, which is the fluctuation in the Earth's magnetic field. And therefore, That's why I definitely think that the houses of the zodiac, saying that you're born under a specific house, I certainly do think that that's an accurate way to describe yourself, because it's an energetic representation. If you're dealing with occult philosophy, you have to understand the axiom that you pre-existed before your birth and will exist after your birth. And so there are, you could put it just in a very basic way, they're symbolic of the choices that you made coming into this life. And so they're almost like clues, if you want to put it like that. You see what I'm saying?
And we do know that the study of astrotheology, or the development of astrotheology, pretty much is what led to like the three big religions of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. That's correct? Yes.
Yeah, that would be obviously controversial to those who are part of that religion, but that is what the data shows, and that's becoming, that's what I would say,
Right. Like the
and that's also becoming.
Christianity was studied, was more study of, it was the solar cult, study more of the sun being the god, whereas Islam is more of a moon cult. And then you have Judaism, which was more of the stars. um, I don't know if planets is involved, but more of a star cult.
Right, and this would be one of the leading ideologies held about these religions by anthropologists and, like comparative religion, theologians and stuff like that. People aren't who are deeply interested in these subjects but aren't specifically tied to one. It is becoming common knowledge that these are astrotheological religions, and furthermore, they're all deeply embedded or I should say numerology is deeply embedded within them all, because I mean, um, if that's new to anybody, I mean, where do you think the numbers from the Bible came from? Why do they do all that number coding and stuff? It's all gematria. It's the Bible is a graph, basically.
And going into the last art, how does Kabbalah slash Tree of Life interplay with all this? And maybe explain even what it is.
Yeah, well, that's perhaps the most enigmatic of all of them, because we don't even really necessarily know where it came from. The Kabbalists, who were the ancient Hebrews, definitely got it from the Egyptians. Um, and who knows where the Egyptians got it from? The waters get a little bit murky from there, and some people might debate. I certainly think it predates even Egypt, although I couldn't comment on the specifics of that. But so the Tree of Life is perhaps the most ancient form that we have, and then I believe tarot was the next, or astrology would have come from that, because that was the original formation of the symbols, and then you get tarot, and then you get more advanced stuff like numerology. But so the Tree of Life was kind of the foundation of all of this like symbolic principle, and it's empirical deduction of metaphysics of and it's you have 10 points on this Tree of Life, because it's a geometric shape connecting all these 10 dots called Sephiroth. And it also is supposed to represent, and often is represented as, an actual tree, and that's how it's laid out in the geometric sequence as well. You have the bottom Sephiroth as the roots, and it goes upward from there. And these, as a general sense, could be excuse me, could be characterized as like planes of existence in the most nuanced, broadest sense that you could think of. Planes of existence in your brain, maybe densities of dimension,
Such
alchemical
as like,
states.
from what I understand, you have like the physical plane, and you have like the mental plane, and you have like the emotional plane, and then I forget what the last one is. It's like the spiritual plane. Is that, I don't know if that's correct or not.
That certainly ties into it. You're actually, I believe, you're talking about the pentagram, which is
No, no, no. That's
um,
the Tree of Life, I believe, as Mark Passio talks about it.
No, what was that again that you say?
I think that was, from what I understood, that was what the Tree of Life. Those were the planes within the Tree of Life.
Well, yeah, no, that's certainly incorporated into it, and I see what you're saying. The 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 pentagram, I mean, as well, comes from the same body of symbolism, and it's because I mean that it basically represents the elements and then the spirit, and so you that is an overlay onto the tree of life as well. It embodies all of those elements and the spirit as well. It's a synthesis of the microcosm and the macrocosm. You could call it a map of the microcosm macrocosm dichotomy, and that's why it's important to be studied in conjunction with all three of the others, because more so than any of the others, the tree of life provides a foundation context for understanding these things.
Right. From what I understood, basically, it's like starting at the most basic. It's basically a logical deduction of how to go from a subjective experience to aligning fully with the objective reality, like aligning your subjective reality with the objective reality. And it's kind of like, you know, a step by step process, kind of in a way. Like, first, you need to, you know, understand the physical plane, and then you need to then understand the intellectual plane, intellectually, you know, knowledge. Then you need to be emotion, you know, understand your emotional levels, and then you can start to transcend then to the higher levels of consciousness in a way. That's
Right.
at least how I've come to understand it.
Yeah. It's certainly popular to um, correspond them to the chakra points as well, because although those were separate schools of thought, they align and synthesize perfectly. Because they're
Right.
essentially stemming from the same thing, which is the occult, and going upwards of the tree of life, towards the self-actualization at the top is the exact principle of the Kundalini awakening and unleashing the serpent's coil at the base of the spine and going upward um, to your brain and experiencing deeper states of meditative consciousness. So yeah, it all goes hand in
Right.
hand.
So I just wanted to wrap it up here. I want to give my kind of explanation, I guess, of how they all tie together. Then maybe you could finish off with the last point and kind of going off mine. I guess kind of what I've come to learn is that, you know, these four are, as you said, symbolic sciences. You have, you know, the numerology, which is studying the numbers behind symbols, like you're studying the actual maybe physical data of the numbers. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
like the tree of life, which is more of like kind of like a, it's like a symbolic roadmap on how to fully self-actualize, but it actually has, it's very logically deduced. It like deduces it down to the most logical steps of how to get there. And
Right, it's an
then
empirical analysis for
right,
sure.
and then all this is all, you know, all, and this is all to kind of align with the, you know, align your, as we keep saying, micro and macro, but align your subjective experience with the objective, because you really need to, you need to be aligned with the objective, but also be fully aware of yourself subjectively. And I think the only way to do that is become fully aware inside and then align yourself with the outside. And so this is like, it's a symbolic sciences that are used to self-actualize.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kabbalah is kind of you know, a symbolic, you can study it to learn how to self-actualize more. And then you have astrology that mixes in, which is kind of studying the macrocosm and its effects on you, because the way the earth moves, the solar, the what's it, the precession of the equinoxes have effects on us. So, you know, not maybe not on a daily level, but have some effects on us. So it's understanding the that effect. And then tarot as well is another tool that we can use to kind of tap into the kind of almost like the subconscious archetypes that maybe we need to explore more in a way. Would you say that kind of is a decent attempt to wrap them up together?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's really heady material, and um it's not super easy to um, kind of like, generalize it and get something across that's not too long, but also is comprehensive. And I feel like, you definitely have an accurate understanding. And I would just illustrate for anybody else listening that, you know, all of occult philosophy is kind of stabbing at the idea that humans need to synthesize with natural law. And I like Taoism of China because I feel like it's the most blatant representation of that, because Tao, is that universal essence, which you could also consider natural law. And um, the free will debate is interesting because in the end, I think what occult philosophy is really getting into is that free will becomes kind of trivial in the long run, because it's more about aligning yourself with the natural objective law, the things like um yeah, you could best differentiate that as what helps life flourish and what helps it diminish,
Right.
so um it's if you're not aligning yourself with natural law, as a Taoist would say, you're fighting the waves, you're going against the current, and that is part of natural law. I don't care what you believe in. There's that current of life, and if you're fighting against it, you are not going to succeed, and you're going to have a shitty time. And so, what these divination sciences are is just a way for a human being to get back in touch with themselves and the world around them. And
Right.
people have gone you know, some people have tried really hard to discredit them, for a reason, because they're useful.
Right. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. That there are natural objective laws to the universe. It works a certain way. Not no. There's um, a skeleton to it. It's not to say there's a whole picture. There's definitely not a whole picture, but there are some core ways in which the world works, and these divination sciences and these occult philosophies on it are a way to connect with this natural law. So I think that's a good way to wrap it up. Um, Thank you, anyone who's listening and check this out. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. We're going to hopefully have a lot more content coming your way. Hopefully, start diving into some other subjects, not just the occult. It's just been something that we've been on a bit lately. But thank you once again, and look forward to the next episode. Ciao.
Yeah, yeah. Have a great day, guys. Enjoy it. Peace.